get live first.
Emma, will you lead us in a word, please?
If you'll join me. Father God, we come to you now and we just thank you and we praise you for the great comforter that you are. And Lord, we just lift up the Lopez family to you right now, and we just ask for your peace and your blessing on them. And Lord, we ask that you are with the Lovato family as well, and that you bring your peace and your comfort and just your presence as they go through their grieving. Lord, we thank you and we praise you for the rain that you've blessed our lands with. We thank you for your perfect timing in all things. And we ask that you continue to bless our land. We ask that you're with each person here in this room today. Bless them for coming. Keep them safe on their travels home. Be with each member of the county family and just protect them and their family as well. And Lord, we ask a special blessing on this commission, that you just guide and direct them in all that they do. And Lord, we just thank you for your son. And it's in his precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, is a symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures.
All right, before we get started here, I think we need to take care of a little business. Ms. Dixon, would you like to?
Yes, we need to amend the agenda, please, to add the MAT program, Chris from the MAT program, under the number 5, and also Mandy, the clerk.
All right.
Mr. Chairman. On the agenda, there's some things I'd like to discuss with you and get the board's take on it, their opinion on it. In consulting the minutes of the meeting, we're down to the minutes of the last meeting. We're talking about when we were discussing the new business item of it was, can you hear? As we were discussing in the minutes, and I know it's not time to approve the minutes, but I think this has bearing on the agenda. Try to find which one. Discussion and consideration to remove Dominion machines. It's D. Discussion and consideration to remove Dominion machines. Commission, it's about halfway through that paragraph. Commissioner Dixon made a motion to conduct a recount following the general in November. Commissioner Grider raised a point of order, noting he would not take a vote. We could not take a vote on an item that's not on the agenda. And Attorney Garcia recommended the item be placed on a future agenda. And then Commissioner Dixon withdrew her motion and asked that the item be placed on the October meeting agenda. That was met with no objection. Obviously, Mr. Grider knows how to rise to the point of order because he did it. When she asked to put it on the agenda with no objection means that action was approved in the open session. And my contention is any action that is taken and approved in an open session belongs to the commission, cannot be removed without the commission's consent. But as I look at the agenda, that item is not on the agenda. So I'm curious, somewhere along the way, somebody made the decision to remove that item from the agenda after she asked to be on the agenda and it was approved by the commission, belongs to the commission, cannot be withdrawn without the commission's consent. I would ask that that item be put back on the agenda. the item was, she asked,
Commissioner Lee?
Yes, Ms. Dixon.
Actually, that is why Mandy was on the agenda. That's because she was left off. She was the one that was gonna do that. And so that's why I added Mandy back as the clerk, because she was doing it under her department head reports on that to be placed on the agenda.
that's good. And I appreciate that. Look forward to her presentation. But when you remove that item off of the agenda, and we've already established the fact that no action be taken on a motion that's not on the agenda.
Mhm.
Had it been on the agenda, as my constituents, many were here and expected to be on the agenda, now it's not. So now we can't take action because it's not on the agenda. That prevents us from taking any action on whether or not we're going to take a hand count vote.
Well, that's
And it was
not,
asked to be on there.
but that's not up to us. That would be up to the clerk to whether or not she's going to do a hand count vote. That's why it was deferred to the clerk to do that. She was going to do it anyway.
I disagree. I think if it's on the agenda, that puts it open for discussion, and we might have something to say that has bearing. And we might offer some type of a motion pertaining to it that is germane to it. But now we can't. Now, for instance, we've asked, or my constituents have asked Aaron Clements to come and present.
Mhm.
I don't know exactly what her presentation will be entirely, but if this were an agenda item, and after we heard her presentation, it might be advisable for us to do something about the hand count. So anyway, all I'm asking, and it's your pleasure as the commission, is to put back on the agenda for discussion and possible action to have a hand count vote.
I'd like to refer to the attorney here for a minute. Would that be something that the Board of Canvass would have to make to hand count votes, not as a commission? Because I know we have to go into Board of Canvass to verify the votes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, if you're just going to do an informal audit recount after the vote, after the 45 days has passed, then the canvassing provisions don't come into play with that.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of depends on what kind of audit you're talking about. As I understood it, was going to be sort of a hand count or an audit just after the general informal and after the 45 days. If that's the case, you don't need to go through the other formal canvass procedures. Does that answer your question?
No. Okay. This may not be the right time, right place to discuss this. But I would like to ask the commission to ask the lawyer to prepare a writ of mandamus to go to the Secretary of State, asking her to certify the machines. Is she going to ask us to certify an election that is taken and tabulated by machines that are not certified? So my thought was I would like to ask the council to prepare a writ of mandamus, asking the Secretary of State to certify the machines. Should she fail to do so, I think that our recourse would be we cannot certify an election taken on a non-certified machine. I would be willing to certify an election taken with a hand count, but I'm not willing to certify an election tabulated with a machine that's not certified. That's why I wanted on the agenda the motion to talk about hand counts, because in that discussion, I wanted to bring that up. So now, do you have any suggestions?
Mr. Chair, Vice Chairman Savage, I'm not 100% sure of this, so I have to check, and maybe the clerk could correct me if I'm wrong. But ordinarily, you don't do a hand count unless there's a contested election, and so I don't know what provision we would be operating under if we were going to do a hand count without a contest. The audit that I understood we had talked about last week was after the 45 days, after which the ballots can be destroyed and so forth, and also subject to public record. So there are kind of two different things going on, I suppose. If we're going to do a mandamus towards the Secretary of State, it's complicated. I don't know if it's ever been attempted before.
I have
John,
no
please
clue.
don't talk when I'm trying to listen to the attorney,
We
if you don't
could
mind.
talk about that.
Thank
It
you.
might be better to talk about that in a closed litigation session if we're gonna pursue that. That is something that is subject to a closed meeting if we're going to pursue litigation. So that might be more appropriate for an executive session. But I don't want to give you the wrong answer on it. So I'd rather do a little bit of studying and a little research on it and then talk to you about it in a closed session, if that's okay.
All I wanted when I said that last time was we were in the discussion and I asked our clerk, is there a reason we cannot do a hand count? And she said, that's fine with me. So I said, well, let's put it on there. So I said I wanted it on the agenda. When it's going under Mandy at clerk, that to me is on the agenda if she was going to speak about it, because I don't know what it does. I'm not a clerk. That's where I did it. And I would appreciate the next time you start a conversation, if you do not talk condescending to me, because I don't
I'm not
appreciate
talking condescending to you.
it.
I'm
Yes,
just
you,
talking-
that's the way you started.
Hey, both of you, one person at a time will speak.
Mr.
We
Chairman.
will not overspeak each other.
Thank you, Mr.
We will take our time and listen to each other.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that because I do not intend to criticize anyone, but I don't want to be criticized.
All right. Well, right now I have a motion on the floor to the agenda to add the clerk and the
I have one more request.
granted.
At the last time we had a resolution pertaining to sanctuary for the unborn, I believe that Mrs. Smith was allowed to speak immediately prior to that motion coming on the floor. On this particular agenda, Mr. Marker and Mrs. Smith are listed as speaking in the public request section. They filled out the forms to speak, not so that they wouldn't be limited to 3 minutes, and they wanted to speak on the abortion topic. So what I would ask that Mr. Marker and Mrs. Smith be allowed to speak immediately prior to that motion coming before the commission. That'll be on 6D.
So your motion is what?
To allow Larry Marker, Angie Smith to speak instead of in the public request portion, let them just speak immediately after 6C, before 6D comes up for consideration.
Or would you like to add their name behind your name? Is that what you're saying?
Okay, that would work.
That's your motion.
Yes, please.
I'll second.
Are we all clear on the agenda amendments to add the clerk under elected officials, to add the MAT program with detention, and move Mr. Marker and Ms. Smith behind Mr. Savage on item 6D. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? agenda amended. Now I'd like approval of the amended agenda. Well, I was getting kind
So
of
moved.
tongue-tied there. I have a motion to approve the amended agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So none, agenda moved. Item 2, approval of the minutes of September the 20th, 22 regular meeting.
I move we adopt the minutes, accept the minutes as submitted here.
Second.
I have a second. All those in favor of approving the minutes of September the 20th say aye.
Aye.
So moved. Now on to public request. All right. At this time, I'm going to allow people to get up and speak. You'll be limited to 3 minutes. I will ask Miss Hamilton to time it so we don't run too long. And I don't want no cheering and clapping so everybody can be heard. I don't want everybody talking amongst yourself so we can hear the person up there speaking well. So at this time, if there's somebody that would like to get up and speak on something.
And they need to introduce themselves for the
Oh, yeah.
clerk.
Please introduce yourself at the mic so the clerk can put
And they'll have to turn it on probably.
Mr. Bennett.
Charles Bennett. When you selected, or Mr. Chairman and Commission, when you selected me to represent our community on the NMU President Search Committee, I promised that I would report back to you. The current administration appointed 18 members to the selection committee. It is composed of 2 regents, the NMU student body president, a local attorney, with the remaining 14 members being current or former employees of NMU. I was not asked to serve on the committee, but would be an alternate. 2 members of the committee have stepped down since the process began. One member that stepped down was replaced by the husband of one of the current female committee members. The other was replaced by a gentleman from Arizona. 97 applications were received. The committee reduced the applicants to 10. After further review, these 10 will be reduced to 5 applicants that will be presented to the regents. It is my understanding that this will happen soon, maybe next week. Up to this point, I've dealt with facts about the process. From this point on, my comments or my opinion about the process. My opinion is based on conversations with people either involved or close to the process. I have had lengthy conversation with a gentleman that had a friend that made it to the top 10. I asked the gentleman lots of questions. If my information is correct, a score sheet was used to rate each individual. Sounds like a reasonable solution to use to reduce 97 to 10. That is until the gentleman described the friend that made it to the top 10. The friend didn't meet any of the job description that I had read when the process began. Once again, my opinion. I think that anyone that displayed strong leadership skills were given low scores, if not zeros, on their score sheet to make sure they did not advance. The process of the committee selection and replacement shows me there is a deliberate effort to exclude our community from having any effective input. Their response will be, but we held meetings for community input. Our response should be, we still didn't have a seat at the table. The regents are the last step in this process. Don't be afraid to email the regents and let them know if this search committee does not submit individuals with strong leadership skills, don't stick us with a mistake. Just start over. I've met with Steve Durgis before I came over here. He's one of the 2 that resigned. I asked him if there was a quote I could use to tell people instead of making up something or just telling them to ask him. He said, my ethics would not allow me to continue. Thank you.
Is there anyone else not so like to speak?
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Kay Elack, and I know we've got 3 people that have come to speak to us today, and I would just encourage you to keep an open mind and look to the future. I think sometimes we tend to look at the past a little too much, but I think we need to look to the future and do what's best for our county and our state. Thank you.
Yes, sir. If you'll go.
Hello, County Commissioners. My name is Logan Brown. I'm a lifelong resident of Portales in Roosevelt County. Because of my lack of time, I'm going to have to be brief and a little blunt at times, so I'm not trying to offend anyone. And I'm talking specifically on the issue of the land use moratorium that Mr. Marker and Mrs. Smith will be presenting later on. So please hear them out, as the previous person said. So first off, I am proposing an amendment to the land use moratorium that Mr. Marker will be presenting. My amendment that I'm proposing is to, and this will be more clear later on when you actually see the land use moratorium. My proposed amendment is to remove the term healthy. So there's a term in there that says to terminate a healthy human pregnancy. And I have 3 to 4 years experience in an abortion abolitionist ministry where we minister to women seeking abortions. And if there's one thing I know for sure, I know that the abortion mills will twist and pervert any rule or loophole to perform abortions. So let's see. If you leave the word healthy in the land use moratorium and it does pass, you're leaving an easy loophole for the abortionist, because who gets to define what a healthy pregnancy is? The abortionist, the one that has a profit, is making profit off of the slaughter of the child. So, and also I provided some statistics for you as well. There was a study done outside, or it was published in the New York Times, that 85% of fetal prenatal genetic testing are wrong, that they are actually inaccurate tests. So, and that was published in the New York Times. So even if they did genetic testing and found something wrong or unhealthy, quote unquote, with the fetus, then they could say, we're doing this for, a cleft lip or and they'll make up a slew of reasons for why they can still do the abortion. And then if they try to say that it's for the health of the mother, that's what some of the documentation that I provided you. One of those letters is representing 2,500 OGBYN, that pro-life OGBYN, and it is saying there is never a medical reason for an induced abortion. So sometime I would like you to review that material as well. So that's the amendment that I'm proposing for the land use moratorium. Second, I want to draw your attention to the New Mexico Constitution, and that's the last page of your little packet. And it's going to be Article 2, Section 4 under the Bill of Rights for all New Mexicans. And this is in the inherent rights section. I'm going to read it verbatim. All persons are born equally free and have certain natural, inherent, and inalienable rights, among which are the rights of enjoying and defending life and liberty, of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and of seeking and obtaining safety and happiness. So I understand one of the major conjunctions with the land use moratorium is to protect property, and I commend you for that. And that's yes, sir. And that's in the same part of the New Mexico Constitution that also says to defend and protect life. So please, yes, sir.
Do we have anyone else? Yes.
Hello. Nice to be here this morning. I thank you.
Please state your name.
My name is Jeanette McDonald. I'm new to Portales, and I just want to say first off that it really feels good to be in a type of environment that is of God-fearing people. To see people praying almost everywhere I go is truly, it's a very warm feeling, and that's something I really don't want this place to lose, especially now that I'm here. So I'm going to read a statement. There's a number of people that wish they could be here, but of course the time and to speak on these matters during work hours, and I had the ability to come in today, so I'm just having a statement. At a young age, I was involved in fighting for children's rights to be able to go to clinics to obtain birth control and sex educations without parents' permission. Having options of premarital sex seemed to be a good idea to me at the time. They had so many options, multiple forms of birth controls, IUDs, before and after pills, abstinence. I didn't realize that teaching safe sex practices was eliminating responsibility. People want options when it comes to either destroying or allowing a life to live, equating themselves to God, when there's other options like adoptions or donating embryos. I went from passing out glow-in-the-dark condoms for free to watching angry-looking women yelling for their right to kill their live children in the womb or even after birth, and even the right to eat them. It sounds like sacrificial worship to me. I realized I helped the opening of a demonic door. We went from fighting for birth control to fighting for the ability to eat our children. That's how far it goes when you open these doors. I know teenage girls who purposely got pregnant just to gain clear skin and to grow good hair. I know people who's had more than 15 abortions. I know people that had so many abortions that when they wanted to have kids, they were unable to, not looking and thinking of the future, at the time of their decision. I understand the importance of laws and regulations and how they affect our community because of this. That is why I plan to be involved in this community where I am now in hopes to fight against where I lived in Los Angeles. I feel very blessed and comfortable to be a part of Roosevelt County and the ordinance and proclamations that you guys stand by, both which focuses on the customs and culture of this community. It felt good to know that 2 years ago, the commission unanimously declared the county to be a pro-life and a sanctuary for unborn in support of life. So I'm not very clear how this is still coming about, but we're here and people are still standing strong for the same effort today, and I'm happy about that. My understanding is that the culture and the beliefs of the majority of the people here in Roosevelt County denounces the invasion of cultures
Miss
and
McDonald,
ideas.
your 3 minutes are up. I'm sorry. We have to be fair to everybody. They only get 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else like to? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Meredith Eaton. I'm a resident of Roosevelt County, and Mr. Savage is my representative as my commissioner. Thank you all for taking an active role in protecting our use rights and land rights as our representatives here in the county. As a council, you have no problem passing regulations on air quality, sewage control, lagoons for dairies, burn bans, and I'm thankful for that. With that being said, if you choose to let the moratorium fail when it goes to vote, how are you going to handle the consequences of clinics coming into our area? What are we going to do with the dead bodies? Are we going to build cemeteries? Are we going to flush them into our sewer? Are they going to run to 18th Street and go down the road? We are going to deal with that. We're going to deal with chemicals. We're going to be dealing with lethal medical equipment. So I think as we don't accept things, that means, or as we fail things, that means we accept the alternative. So what are we going to do if we accept these things coming into our community? So that is an ugly side of it, but it is the truth. So what is going to happen with that? I implore you to act in boldness and not react in fear of what those outside of our community may say or do. It is clear that this community wants these protections in our area. And so please stand for the people that have put you here in office because we do not want this. Thank you.
Yes.
Dear Commissioners, I'm Pastor Pete Gorm, pastor of Faith in Christ Lutheran Church. I've often attended these commission meetings, and I appreciate the responsibility you have assumed to yourself, which is excellent. I have not prepared any remarks, but I do speak for life. But this might be one of those times where those three men who were about to be thrown into the fiery furnace said, "We know, King, you can do that. And if you do that, it still will not change. We will still serve the Lord." This may be a time when we have to stand for what is good and right and bear the consequence. We in America have had an excellent time for 200 years where we haven't had to suffer much persecution. But if we don't stand up for what is good and right, it may get much worse. So I pray that you consider this wisely and make a decision that is good for life. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lillian Loy, and I want to talk about the bond issue that's coming up for the university. I would like to encourage you to say no. They have a lot of money. I think that the money in this county needs to follow the student. We have kids that would go to trade schools and things like that that would better our community. We need to keep the money here with the local residents and the people that have elected you. Thank you for your time.
Anyone?
I'm Scotty Savage, and I have a lot to say, so I'm going to say it real fast if you'll forgive me. First of all, we have 50% of Americans believe that we have voter fraud. When the Democrats win, all the Republicans scream there was fraud. When the Republicans win, it goes the other way. Now, Rod alluded to this earlier, and you're going to hear more from Aaron. But there is a federal law in the books, and there's a law in the state that these all voting machines have to be certified. They have not been certified in New Mexico. I want to read to you a guy who is paid to certify. It's called a logic and accuracy test. He's a programmer, and here's what he says. My son is a programmer for some of the largest banks in the nation, and he will agree to this. Here's what this guy says. People around the country have been asking me to attend the logic and accuracy testing of their election systems. It's kind of a waste of time for me to be there. First of all, the logic and accuracy tests themselves are a complete charade. Every programmer understands that they can make software behave differently on different days with a single line of code. Every IT person understands that whenever someone puts any kind of portable media, in other words, like thumb drives, into a device, it can reprogram that device. So I suggest you ask them the following two questions. Do you perform logic and accuracy tests randomly throughout the election or just before and after? Do you use portable media to transfer any of the election information? Now, Mandy inputs in every election who's running. She has to send that information. That computer does not know how to count votes every time it changes. She has to get that information from Dominion. I'm the CEO of Dominion. Paul Greider's running for commissioner. And I get a letter, a note. He didn't do anything on paper. And it says, I'll give you $5 million if you'll help me win this election. I don't care if he's a Democrat or a Republican. And people, that's how we're losing elections. That's one of the ways. Okay, I want to talk to you about abortion if I didn't lose my place. I learned something really incredible the other day. The minute an egg is fertilized, that now little human has DNA. DNA is what gives each one of you a unique humanness, makes you a person. No one has a right to destroy that. I know you guys are
Scotty, your
pro-life.
3 minutes are up. I'm sorry, dear.
Okay. Dang it. Talk fast.
Does anyone else have something to speak on the agenda? You'll speak. You can speak with her. All right, we're going to move on then. So, since we moved that down there under Mr. Savage, where'd my pen go? Let's go to informational items. Roosevelt General. Is Kay here?
She's not, but you still have Miss Clements.
See, oh, Aaron Clements.
Yeah.
Oh, she's not with them. That ain't okay. Excuse me. My bad. Miss Clements. Go ahead.
Hello, thanks for having me here today. My name is Erin Clements. I'm a civil structural engineer. I've been working in the state of New Mexico for 18 years on a wide range of public infrastructure projects. If you add up the value of the projects I've designed, planned, constructed, overseen, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars all over the state. So after November 4th, I realized something had gone very wrong with our election, and I've spent the better part of the last 2 years studying our election system the same way I would any of those infrastructure projects that I've worked on that have been paid for with taxpayer money. And it's actually kind of similar. It's a system, it has a history, it has a lot of data, so that's what I've been doing. Before I begin my presentation, I want to assure the clerk that I have every confidence that she's doing a fantastic job. I spent a full day with her a couple months ago when we scanned your ballots to do a recount with the software that we've built. And she was excellent. She was transparent, open, answered every question we had, very generous with her time. So this is in no way, nothing I say is in any way a disparagement of her work, because I think most of the clerks in our state are great and they do a great job, but they've been given a system which is like Swiss cheese, which is easily subverted. And those are the things I want to talk about. So my presentation, I'm going to cover 4 main areas. I'm going to show you evidence of fraud and manipulation in our New Mexico elections that we've uncovered through our work, the public confidence crisis which exists, and the fact that the election system is not properly certified. And I'll show you that with the Secretary of State's own documents. And then what you all can do, what your authority is and what your responsibility is. You go to the next slide. So let's start. This is where I started in my investigation. Every time I design a treatment plant or water system, I go back to the historical data for that system. So the obvious place to start would be our voter rolls in New Mexico. So I got a copy of the statewide rolls from the Secretary of State. And one of the first things I did was I plotted how many people are registering every day in each county. So across the bottom of that graph are the dates. And then on the left side, those are how many people are registering per day. Oh, I'm sorry, this was supposed to be Roosevelt County. I thought I traded it out. I'm sorry. No, probably not. Anyway, Roosevelt looks exactly like this, is the point. We had fairly, low registrations in 2016 and 2017 in all of our counties. And then in 2018, things started to get really crazy. The numbers of people who were registering per day were doubling or tripling. And then in 2020, it got out of control. Numbers of registrants, where now we're tripling the number that we used to register per day. And there's a lot of red flags about this and a lot of things that happened over this time period. In 2016, the state of New Mexico joined what's called ERIC. That's the Electronic Registration Information Center. And theoretically, what they do is they take the voter rolls from all their member states and they compare them to one another so that they can tell if somebody is registered in multiple states. They can send the clerks, notices. These people might be double registered. They also send them names of people who live in their counties who are not registered so that they can invite them to register. That may or may not be okay, except when you look at all the people that have joined ERIC, nobody's rolls have gotten smaller and more accurate. They've all grown exponentially since joining ERIC. So that may or may not be a direct result of joining ERIC, but that's a fact. The other thing New Mexico did in 2018, 2017 is they gave the motor vehicle department right access to the rolls. So previously, if you go get your license, the MVD would say, do you want to register to vote? If you say yes, they would send that paperwork to the clerks. The clerks would add them. Now the MVD has right access, so they can add people directly to the rolls. So that sounds great and convenient, except when you consider how valuable our election system is and what a high value target it would be for someone to subvert it. So instead of having 33 clerks' offices who had right access to the rolls, now we have hundreds of access points through the MVD, which you can tell as soon as we join the MVD, the patterns change dramatically. And I don't believe that's all legitimate. I believe it's being subverted. Another thing our Secretary of State appears to have done is given a far left organization called Rock the Vote also a backdoor access to the rolls. I discovered a set of emails between Rock the Vote and some NGOs in our state, asking the Secretary of State, hey, it's kind of a pain for us to register voters with your paperwork and your website. Could we just have direct access where we don't have to go through your website to register voters? And she appears to have granted that enhanced access, which is not available to everybody, but it is to this far left organization. Now, the thing about 2020, you can see this is Otero County. I apologize, it's not Roosevelt. I had switched it out, but I don't know what happened. But you can see in 2020, you went from maybe 15 people registering on a peak day to 180 people registering on a peak day in 2020. Now let's remember what happened to us in 2020. Our governor shut us down, and she shut us down hard. And all the normal methods of registering people to vote would be you go to a college campus, you sit in the mall as people walk by, you ask them to register. Well, there were no students on the college campus. Another way to register people is you go door to door and say, hey, do you want to register to vote? Well, I remember anyone going door to door for political purposes during 2020 was shamed into oblivion. There was no door to door going on. Also, the MVD was essentially shut down from March of 2020 to December 2020. And 80% of our registrations are now coming from the MVD. So how did we have this massive surge of registrations? Honestly, if there was, every method of registering voters was severely constricted. So I have giant questions about that. And you see that red box I have, and you see there's a white space underneath. Here, I can point to it right here at the bottom. That's showing that there's no 0 days. So people are getting registered every Sunday during 2020 when none of these offices are open, if they're open at all. So this just is not legitimate. Something else that should have been happening through our registration history is we had laws on the books prior to 2020 where the registration database was to be shut down at the beginning of early voting. It was not to open up again until the final canvases were in. But you can see, so that's roughly a 2-month period around every election. There should have been no registrations for 2 months around every primary, around every general. But you can see there's no blank days at all in the record. So that was not being respected. If you go to the next slide. Now, it doesn't matter what county you're looking at. They all have the same features. They have no blank days. They have the same peaks. They have crazy manipulation happening in 2020. So here's 4 counties at a time. This is 2 red, 2 blue, 2 large, 2 small. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. Now, humans don't act that way. They don't coordinate by county and all show up at the same time, have the same peak days. It just doesn't. This is not human behavior. If I saw something like this in a water system or a sewer system, I'd say, none of your meters are working. Something is seriously wrong. Or you have giant leaks somewhere. There's something wrong, is my point. Next slide. So here's 12 counties at a time. You can see they're all the same. If I could put all 33 counties on a slide, they all look the same. Next slide, please. All right, so that was 5 years of data at a time. Let me zoom in on this is like 12 weeks of data. This is statewide registrations, and now I'm breaking them out by party so you can see how people are behaving. Those little squiggles you could barely see. This is zooming in on those. So on the bottom are the dates. On the left side are the number of people being registered. Now you can see that it comes in these perfect weekly patterns where you just have these, repeating 2 peaked hill shapes happening week after week after week after week after week for years at a time. People don't behave that way. You might have a peak week here and there. You don't expect the same number of people to show up every Tuesday and every Saturday, but that's exactly what this shows. And it gets worse than that because when you look at how they're registering by party, you can see that they appear to be scaled, where Democrats, without fail, always out-register the Republicans by a certain percentage, and then the decline to state voter essentially matches the minority party, the Republicans. So what you have to believe this is true is that somehow you can register 150 people on Mondays. Now you can have say 100 of those be Democrats, and then you can have 25 be Republicans, and 25 must be declined to state. And then you do the same thing the next day, and the next day, and the next day. That's not how people behave. There's no doubt in my mind that this is manipulated, and it has been subverted, and is not secure. And this is something I brought to the attention of the Secretary of State. She ignores it. Instead of dealing with it, she accuses me of making this up. I'm not the only engineer or person to have noticed these patterns. I've spoken to 2 other retired Sandia engineers who said they noticed this years ago before I did. So this needs to be investigated. It means your elections in Roosevelt County are affected because your roles are affected. And if they're affecting your roles, they're doing it for a purpose. And we have to deal with that and look at it and figure out what's going on and fix it. If you go to the next slide. All right, so if they're subverting the roles, I mean, clearly there's access to them somewhere, whether it's someone in the MVD or someone the MVD doesn't know about who's just gained access, or some other way, I don't know. But they're doing it to affect the elections. And I can show that the elections are being affected because I got a set of emails between the Secretary of State and this woman named Catherine Clark, who was running for county clerk in Santa Fe County in 2020. She won her election, but during 2020, she was a candidate. She was a consultant to other candidates. She was writing field plans for them. She was also a Democrat official. And the Secretary of State on election day sent Catherine Clark a set of 5 emails, one at 7:55, one at 10:30, one at 3:15, one at 3:30, and then one at 7 p.m. when the polls closed. The emails contained the poll book reports for the entire state and every county in the state. And why she's getting her own set of poll book reports is, it's beyond unethical, if not illegal, for the Secretary of State to directly funnel a Democrat official candidate operative her own set of data that nobody else has access to. So that's bad enough on the surface. But then when you look at what the data is inside, what I could do is I could see how many ballots had been cast in every county by party. And if you have that information, you can predict the outcome of the election. If you know what turnout is, you know how people typically vote, you know their party, you know whether or not your candidates are going to win just by studying that. And here she is getting her own set of data. Well, I added up the numbers of how many votes were in all the counties from this set of data, which I've included in a report I've put online. You can read it for yourself and check my numbers. But Santa Fe and McKinley County, after 10:30, and there's no reason the vote should just be going up throughout election day, right? Santa Fe lost all its votes. It went to 0 for 15 minutes. And then somehow they got added back in by the end of the day. Why are votes disappearing inside our poll books? And then McKinley County lost all but 20% of their votes. And then it had a giant spike in a 15-minute period where it gained back 20% of the vote and then, finished out the election day. And then we had multiple other counties that had huge, huge jumps in votes in that 15-minute period. So none of that is real, could be real. It would have to be digital manipulation. Everyone in Santa Fe County didn't go back to the polls and say, give me my vote back, I need to cast it again. But they were all taken out and added back in. And we need to know why. We need to know why, one person in one party was given all this stuff when it wasn't available to everybody. Next slide, please. Okay, one of the things we've been told as to why 2020 was so unbelievable to so many people is, well, it was the absentee ballots. Democrats prefer to vote absentee, so you should expect a blue wave when the absentee ballots came in. So I wanted to know, is that historically true? Is it historically true that there is a blue wave in the absentee ballots, that we could say, well, students tend to vote absentee or whatever, and they tend to be farther left? Is that true? So I went back to 2004, and this graph is a little bit hard to understand, but essentially what I did is I took the Republican, it's the Republican result divided by the Democrat result for every county in our state, and I lined them up from the most conservative to the least. So the ones on the left, that's Lee County. You can see Republican votes came in at roughly 4-1 Democrat. That's what that means. really the salient thing I want you to get out of this is that I've separated out the absentee from the in-person. So the absentee is that orange line. The in-person votes are the light blue line. And then the aggregate is the darker blue line. So you can see that the absentee and the in-person, they're in the same neighborhood. Those lines hang out with each other. They cross each other. You know, it makes sense. Sometimes if the orange line is above, that means they favored Republicans. If the orange line is below the blue line, it means they favored Democrats. So really in 2004, there was no telling. Absentee ballots might favor Republicans, they might favor Democrats, you know, but it all hangs out together. You don't expect some totally different result in the absentee ballots. Okay, next slide. So here's 2004 through 2016, the exact same analysis. You can see that the absentee ballots are in the neighborhood of the in-person voting. They don't continuously favor one party or the other. In fact, it's pretty much, you know, up in the air which one they're going to favor. Now go to 2020. Now here's absentee ballots in 2020. They're totally off the scale of in-person. So that yellow line is the in-person votes results. The light blue line are absentee ballots. You can see they don't even touch each other. They favor Democrats, you know, as much as 300%, which is not historically ever happened before, which would speak to a special cause, which is probably not a legal cause, that would cause, you know, all these absentee ballots to suddenly have completely different results than the in-person. This happened in every county. This happened in Roosevelt. Next slide. How did it happen? I think one of the culprits are the drop boxes that were put all over our state, paid for by Mark Zuckerberg. $4.2 million went to our state to fundamentally change the way we cast ballots. It has been proven, you know, in the swing states where they collected a lot of data and they have video evidence of ballot mules just stuffing drop boxes, you know, taking 12 ballots, putting them in a drop box, driving to the next one, doing it again, day after day after day. The drop boxes were clearly subverted. I mean, that's proven with video evidence. We didn't have any video evidence in New Mexico of our drop boxes, but I do have this picture. This is a locked metal box that sits outside the Doña Ana County warehouse. Now, the Doña Ana County warehouse is on the edge of town. It's across the street from the treatment plant. Almost no one knows this building is even there. But a friend of mine who was an election worker had to go to the warehouse during early voting, and she saw this box sitting outside in the corner, and she looked in that slot, and that's what she saw in the slot. It's chock full of absentee ballots. Now, this is not a legal way to cast absentee ballots because, you know, the minimal statutes we have about drop boxes, they're actually a polling place. They have to be advertised. They have to have notices on them saying you are only allowed to return your own ballot. You cannot accept ballots that are in some random metal box at the corner of a warehouse on the outside of town. But our county clerk in Doña Ana County accepted all these ballots. She had no chain of custody for them. I brought this to her attention. She actually doesn't care. But this probably has 5,000 ballots in it. You cast, I think, 7,000 in this county. That means just what's in this box essentially canceled out your voice here. So what happens in other counties, what happens in other states, if illegality is happening, it affects you because you share races. Next slide, please. All right, so this is an analysis that we've done all over the country. It's a cast vote record, analysis of your cast vote record. What the cast vote record is it's a list created by your election system. It has every single ballot that was cast in your county in a spreadsheet with every race on each ballot. So you could say the first ballot in your cast vote record, it would have all the candidates listed across the top, and it would say, you know, how the votes were cast on that ballot. And it's very useful for what we're doing because we go scan the ballots and then we can actually match up the ballots with the entries in the cast vote record, and we can figure out where machines made mistakes or if there was, you know, electronic, if there was something regular happening that wasn't just a mistake. So this is your cast vote record for Roosevelt County. And what I've done, that graph on the top, the CVR number, you see that at the bottom, that's the number of the ballot, and it's actually by 2 because you had spaces in your cast vote record. But what I did is I took like all the ballots, lined them up from 1 to 7,000, and then I put them in groups of 100. So the first 100 are a dot, the second 100 are a dot, the third 100 are a dot, etc., to the end of the record. And I said, what was the percentage that went to Trump in that particular batch? What was the percentage that went to Biden in that particular batch? And what you would expect in a random election is that those should be fairly consistent throughout the record. So if your county went, I think it went something like 75-25 to Trump, you would expect most of the individual ballots to be in that neighborhood within the statistical limits, right? And they do. So for the most part, you'll see the graph on the bottom tells you which counting group it was. So those first several dots are election day. And then you have the next dots are early voting, and then we go to absentee, and then we added in some election day again. Now, the election day early and early votes look pretty consistent with each other. They look within statistical limits. They look fairly random. But when you look at the absentee ballots, they're not consistent. And they should be consistent because that is a random part of your election. That's the most random part of your election. But somehow preferences vastly changed. They're not consistent within themselves. So that's a giant red flag that speaks to subversion through absentee ballots, which I see all over the state. Next slide, please. Now, this is the same analysis for Sandoval County. It's quite a bit more in depth. This was done by a professional statistician with 31 years experience, and she has experience in investigating fraud. But this is the same analysis, and you can see for this one, all the absentee ballots are that first group, the early in-person are the second group, and then the election day in-person are the last group. And you can, I want to just focus on the absentee portion for you because, like I said, that is the random part of your election. People randomly request their ballots. They randomly get mailed out. They sit on your counter a random amount of time before they're filled out. They get mailed back randomly. They get processed randomly. So there's absolutely no reason that every one of those dots shouldn't be within the statistical limits that you would expect based on the size of the group. But you can see not only are a whole bunch of dots outside the statistical limits, that's what those squiggly lines are, but they're also ordered. So they have a trend where the early batches are 90% for Biden. And then as you're processing your absentee ballots, they get slightly less for Biden and slightly more for Trump until you get to the end when it's more like 60% Biden, 40% Trump. Now, there's no way on earth that people are actually coordinating with themselves and saying, okay, Biden voters, you all get to return your absentee ballots first, and then we're going to let the Trump kind of ease their way in, and then towards the end, we'll have the heavy Trump batches. That doesn't happen. And clerks don't order the ballots by candidate. So this trend you see, that linear line down that you see in the absentee ballots, that must be digital manipulation happening inside your machine, inside the machines. So in Sandoval County, you use the exact same equipment they have here. So this system has been subverted. This is evidence of digital manipulation in your absentee ballots. Okay, next slide. Now, another giant red flag that we've recently figured out, I don't know why it took us so long, but your ICE tabulator, when you put your ballot in, it has the ability to print on your ballot. Now, this feature is there for people that can't see. You can put in a blank ballot, and the person that can't see can put on a set of headphones and listen to prompts. They use a joystick, and they can make their selections of who they want to vote for. And then the machine will print on it. It's supposed to reverse it back out so a sighted person, can review the ballot and make sure that's what they intended, and then they put the ballot back in. Well, in New York, the New York State Board of Elections realized that they looked at their tabulators and they realized it had this feature, and they said, that doesn't seem like a good idea. And they went to the Election Assistance Commission, that's the federal bureaucracy that oversees all this stuff. And they said, is it possible that this feature could be subverted with programming? Is it possible that if our tabulators were accessed or the software was accessed, that it could be made to print on ballots without the knowledge of the voter, without the direction of that ADA feature? the answer from the EAC and the testing labs was, well, yes, that's possible, because it's only a matter of the logic programmed into the machine, what it's doing at any given time, whether it's scanning or whether it's printing. It's just programming. So they said, yeah, it's possible, but we don't think it's likely because, we have all these processes and stuff. Well, I found this ballot was in Doñana County. We were given 2 hours to review ballots there. They are not transparent and open like you all are here. So we got 2 hours to look through, they have 80,000 ballots. But we happened to open this box and we started scanning them so we could do the same analysis we do at a very small scale because we couldn't get all of them. But I picked up this ballot and I said, there's something off about this one, because look at those, the vote for president, the vote for U.S. representative, the vote for state senator, state representative, justice of the Supreme Court. Those were all made with a ballpoint pen. It was clearly that they were hand marked with a ballpoint pen. And then you had 2 votes on this thing for senator and county clerk, which were printed by the machine. And I know they're printed by the machine because I saw it demonstrated at a logic and accuracy test. And it has a specific look when you're holding it in your hand that kind of disappears when you have the ballot images that Dominion makes. But these 2 marks, this thing, part of it was printed, part of it was filled out by hand. Did this happen legitimately? I can't really imagine how. Or was the tabulator printing on ballots? If it's printing on ballots, there's really no way you would know, because the printer is made to look like a human made it. That Dominion actually brags about, that they have a library of thousands of marks that they have programmed into their printer. So you'd have to go through, they have thousands of them before they repeat themselves. So this is a giant red flag. Next slide, please. Now this, there was an article just came out, I think it was last week, in a Torrance County newspaper, where some folks went to a logic and accuracy test. They were aware that their tabulators are printers, and they asked, when they were doing the logic and accuracy test getting ready for November, the clerk was, they have to test that feature. If it's out of ink, it won't proceed to fill out the ballot. It will give you an error, and then she knows she's got to change the ink out. So all of her tabulators had to have their ink changed, even though they were just operating in June. So just a few months ago, the ink was fine. It was brand new, replaced. Now, all of a sudden, it said we have to change the ink out. And she said, well, it's probably dried out. And that's been the explanation. Well, we have to change this ink because it dries out. Well, my printer doesn't dry out every 5 months, but that's the explanation they're given by Dominion. So these people who were at the logic and accuracy test said, could we have the old ink cartridges? They took them home. They opened it up. The ink is not dry. It's just gone. So they squeezed that sponge. The ink dripped out. It wasn't dried out. The ink was gone. So where did the ink go between June and November? Could it have printed on ballots in the primary? That is a possibility. The EAC admits it's a possibility. We should not have this feature in our tabulators. At the very least, I've been suggesting that clerks take the ink out unless somebody comes and requests to use this feature, and then you can put the ink cartridge in to print that ballot for a person who can't see, and then take it out again, because something is up with this. Next slide. All right. So that's kind of a very brief summary of my investigation. I could go on for hours telling you all the things I found. I won't do that to you. But the fact is, you can ignore everything I've said. You don't have to believe a word I said, but you have to care about this. This is a July Rasmussen poll of voters across the country. And every one of these should be alarming to an elected official. 50% of all voters believe widespread cheating will affect the outcome of the election that's coming up in 1 month. That means 50% of people who go vote don't expect their vote to count when they cast it in a month. That's a confidence crisis. Between 52 and 60% believe that cheating affected the outcome of the 2020 election. So they don't believe that the people in power now were legitimately placed there. That is a public confidence crisis. It goes on to talk about how people feel, by race. Almost everyone is for photo ID, regardless of race, yet we don't have photo ID in New Mexico because we want to pretend it's racist. Well, in New Mexico, if you have a copy of the voter rolls
and you get the reports about, who's requested their ballots and who hasn't. You know who hasn't voted. You could say, just pretend to be somebody for 5 minutes, go into a polling place, give them a name and address. You can cast a vote under that name. And right now we're just going on, oh, well, everybody's honest. No one's going to do that. That's a stupid way to run your election. We must have photo ID. When we did our Otero County audit, we spent 8 months auditing that election. One of the things we did was we did a door-to-door canvass. We knocked on 20% of the doors in the county. We found a number of people that said, because what we would do is we'd say, did you vote in 2020? And did you cast your ballot by absentee election day or or early? And some people would say, no, I didn't vote. Well, I'd say, well, it says right here you voted, and it says you voted in person. So that means somebody took their name, had their address, pretended to be them for 5 minutes and cast a ballot. This is happening. We cannot go on, this rainbow dream that everybody's honest and no one's going to do this, because they're doing this. I mean, we watched them burn down Albuquerque in the summer of 2020. Those people would totally do it. And somebody is doing this. So, this is the data, regardless of all the analysis, experts have done to show you that it is being subverted. This is really all we need to know, that there is no confidence in our elections. And it's up to you all and you to fix it, So next slide, please. I want to give you the lowest hanging fruit we have as to how you have a reason to fix it that the Secretary of State cannot argue with, because it's based not on my analysis or any expert analysis or any expert opinion. It's based on her own documents. So this right here is the certificate of accreditation for a company called ProVNV. What they are is they're a testing lab that is accredited by the Election Assistance Commission to examine election systems and tell secretaries of state whether or not this system meets the federal guidelines or not. So this accreditation for this company expired February 24th, 2017. All right, so they have licenses just like most professionals do. I'm an engineer. Every 2 years I have to take a certain number of hours, and then I send in a fee that shows I'm keeping up my knowledge, and I have to get relicensed. It's the same idea. Every 2 years they're supposed to re-up their certificate, their accreditation. Next slide. So remember the date, February 2017. This right here is the test report the Secretary of State has on her website right now that tells you that your system is certified. This is for the tabulators, the Dominion system. Note the date, August 2017. 6 months after their accreditation expired, that's when they tested our system. They had no business testing any system with an expired accreditation. As an engineer, when I was several years ago, the company I worked for, there was an engineer in our company, and she let her license lapse for 2 months. She forgot she was supposed to up it in December, and it was like January something, and she's like, oh my gosh, I forgot. It was a huge deal. We had to review all the work she'd done. Had she stamped anything? If she'd stamped anything, somebody else had to review it. You had to alert the client. It was a fee. I mean, she got sanctioned. Thank goodness it was only 2 months worth. If it had gone on, for longer than that, and she had, stamped plans and actually built them, it would be a giant problem. But for these people, their thing expired. They go ahead and they keep testing state systems. New Mexico wasn't the only state affected, but this test report is not valid because they were not accredited when they did it. Okay, next slide. It gets a lot worse than that. That was 2017. I told you the story about the engineer I worked with. 2 months later, she realized I made a big mistake, giant investigation. We had to go through all kinds of stuff at the company. This is March 2020, 3 years later. That's when ProVNV realized that their accreditation had expired. So this is a letter to the Election Assistance Commission telling them, we let our thing expire and we'd like to get reaccredited. 3 years later, anyone else in any profession or any institution that did something like that, they would never work again. They would lose their license. They would go to jail. But here we have ProVNV kind of saying, oh, oops, we messed up, 3 years. And then let's look at the response. Next slide. So it took the U.S. Election Assistance Commission over almost a year to respond to that letter. So they let that sit there for almost a year. And they reminded them, you are supposed to renew every 2 years, and you're supposed to, start the reaccreditation process 30 days before your accreditation expires. But because of COVID, we're going to let it slide. Even though this all happened 3 years before COVID was ever heard of, and the Election Assistance Commission lets it slide, reaccredits them, doesn't alert the states, doesn't alert the people that, by the way, for 5 solid years, when we were supposed to be overseeing the certification of your election, we let the whole thing lapse. There was no certification or accreditation for 5 years. These are the people we're trusting with our election system. Okay, next slide. All right, so that was the story for our tabulators. That's why I say the tabulators are not certified, because the test report you have for them was done on an expired license. It is not a valid test report. Now, it gets even worse for your e-poll books. This is the test report that covers your e-poll book / printing system when you show up at the polls and you say, my name is such and such, and then they print you out a ballot. That's the system I'm talking about. All right, so this test report is dated December 2011. Now, the huge problem with that date is this e-poll book system that we have. The software is updated every couple of months. I confirmed that with our provider. They're called Robus. I called them up and said, when is the last time you certified or you updated your software? And she said, oh, I don't know. It's been a couple of months. I said, a couple of months because our test report's from 2011. Oh, no, it's been updated dozens of times since then. Now, federal law is extremely clear. State law is extremely clear that anytime there's a change in your software, the system must be retested and recertified. So that means every time they updated their software, they should have been recertified, or we could not have used the update. But these people, they actually update your system over the internet whenever they make an update. So there's not even jurisdictional buy-in. They don't even alert you, county clerk, we're about to update the e-poll book, so you could say, well, has it been tested? Is it secure? Has anything changed? It's not like that. It's like an app on your phone that gets updated automatically and you don't even notice. The e-poll books are illegal based on that, okay? They're not certified, and they must be according to federal law. It's very clear. Next slide. All right, so that's what I say when I mean they're not certified. The e-poll books are certainly not certified. The tabulators are not certified. There's another provision in the federal law. When we went to electronic tabulators across the nation, there was a standard written called the voting system standards. And in the voting system standards, it defined what the allowable error was going to be for electronic voting systems. The error was based on what was already being achieved in this technology in the early 2000s. So 20 years ago, this was an error rate that was already being achieved. The maximum error you could have was 1 in 125,000 votes. That means if you count 125,000 votes, you could have one error in that pile of votes. So in a county this size, you could have one error in your election. For the 2020, when you had 7,000 ballots, that equates to about one error when you add up all the races that were on each ballot, right, and multiply it by the number of ballots. You could have one error. Well, I'll get to that in a minute, but this is a summary of the risk limiting audits that the Secretary of State herself has done since 2012. So what she does after every election is they use a computer program that tells them that randomly, of course, computers aren't really random, but it randomly selects a number of counties across the state. It randomly selects precincts within those counties. And then the clerks in those counties that got selected are instructed, like, go Chavez County, go get 22 ballots out of precinct 11. And then I want you to recount these 2 or 3 races. So what the clerk in Chavez County will do is she'll go get those 22 ballots out of that precinct. She will hand tabulate those 3 races on those 22 ballots. Now that's a teeny tiny fraction of the number that were cast in 2020. In Chavez, I think they had 22,000 ballots. You're taking the smallest possible fraction. It's not statistically significant. But anyway, they recount those tiny handful of races, and then they run those same ballots through a tabulator. Obviously, the hand count on those tiny number of votes should match what comes out of the tabulator, right? But it doesn't. In Chavez County in 2020, those 22 ballots, it flipped a vote. It was wrong. Okay, and she was not happy about that. She let the Secretary of State know. She was expecting an investigation. There was no investigation. They didn't get that tabulator and investigate and see why is it flipping votes. nothing happened. They weren't instructed to recount whatever went through that tabulator. The Secretary of State does nothing if there's an error. And I can show it to you because this is her own numbers. So this is the summary of her own risk limiting audits going back to 2012. Just to give you an idea, statewide, she might test somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 ballots in one of these things. So if you have that small of a number of ballots and you're only hand recounting 3 races on it, you can have 0 errors and meet the federal law. But you can see how many errors her own documents say she had. In 2012, there was 77 errors. It was 266 times the legal limit. In 2020, there was 116 errors, which is 168 times the legal limit. So her own machines, which are not certified, do not meet the error rate required by law, required by state statute. So this is another problem. Next slide. All right, we've had a lot of data to go through with all the ballots that we scanned across the state, but just in a very high level, and I'm going to write all this up for you so that you have the actual numbers and the actual ballot images and everything. But in our audit of this county, there was approximately 15 ballots had misadjudicated votes, which means the error was about 15 when it should have been no more than 1. And we haven't gotten into the envelopes yet. I hope to have a report to you so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about, in the next couple of months. Next slide. All right. So the certification, the error rate gives you everything you need to return confidence to the people in their elections, because you have power in the election. I mean, we have this idea that somehow the Secretary of State tells everybody what to do and we are just to follow her lead. But our statutes actually define a role. The Secretary of State has a role. She's supposed to certify the system. She didn't do it. She's supposed to aggregate everything after the election and publish official results. The clerk, you have to certify your individual machines. You do your logic and accuracy test. You put your name on a certification document for every tabulator. That's your role. And then you count the votes and you do the canvass. You all have to review the canvass, say, give it your stamp of approval. Yes, I have confidence in this process. I believe it was done correctly. I believe these results are right. But since the Secretary of State has put you all in a terrible spot by failing to actually give you a certified system and forcing you to use these e-poll books, which are internet connected and extremely vulnerable and not certified in the slightest, she hasn't held up her end of the deal. So what happens to you all? If you certify tabulators aren't certified, what happens to you? If you approve an election that is done on uncertified machines, what happens to you? Go to the next slide, please. The election code actually defines what happens if you know a violation of the election code is occurring and you don't do anything about it. It's a 4th-degree felony. And I'm not trying to threaten you at all. I'm just telling you that the Secretary of State has put you in a very bad spot because there's no public confidence. People are asking you, we want our votes counted in a way that we can trust. And then the law itself says, if we know election violations are happening and we gloss over them, it's a 4th-degree felony. Next slide, please. All right, so this is straight out of our code. All election officials, including county commissioners and county clerks, shall treat their position as a public trust and shall use the powers and resources of public office only to advance public interest. That's NMSA 1016-3. Likewise, you shall conduct yourselves in a manner that justifies the confidence placed in you by the people at all times, maintaining the integrity and discharging ethically the high responsibility of public service. All right, so you all are in a spot. What I would suggest, next slide, if I have another one. I don't think I do. I do. Okay. What I would suggest is the Secretary of State there are hand counting procedures which are acceptable because a certain subset of every county must hand count a certain number of ballots. Those are all the UACAVA ballots. Those overseas military have to be hand counted. There's a certain number of ballots which for whatever reason they got damaged and they can't be run through the tabulators. Those get hand counted. There are already hand counting procedures on the books which are used in every county, every election. It is not illegal to hand count ballots. But it would be illegal to use the tabulators at this point. So what I would suggest is that you put the Secretary of State on notice, because you are in this spot, that you are going to have to hand count your ballots in order to certify them. You could pursue legal action against her. You could file a writ of mandamus to compel her to do her duty to provide you with a certified system so that you're not in a spot that you are. But that's what I would suggest. And I think the public at large trusts hand counting far more than they do machines. I mean, the law itself recognizes the hand count as the final. Whenever there's a dispute, we hand count, right? If a candidate contests their election, we hand count. We accept the hand count. So the law recognizes hand counting. It's done every election before the close of the polls. I mean, it's part of it. So, I mean, there's been thrown out there, well, you can't hand count anything until 45 days after, when it's too late to contest anything. But that's not true, because they're actually hand counted to get to that point in the first place. So what I would suggest is, if you can work with the clerk and yourselves and put the Secretary of State on notice, hey, because of this, we have to hand count our ballots, and then we will accept the outcome. We would even let you run them through the tabulators afterwards if you take the ink out. That might be a compromise that you could do, but at this point, it's going to have to be some kind of compromise, because you cannot follow the law with what is there now. And I would just like to ask all of you if you have any questions at all for me before I close. Yes, sir.
I do.
Okay.
You come up and y'all performed an audit
Yep.
on our county, and we were supposed to hear the outcome of it. And
Yeah.
as to date, I haven't heard anything. So how many fraudulent acts did we have?
Well, I showed you that slide real briefly, that there was some ballots missing. There was about 15 ballots more in the Secretary of State's totals than we actually saw. And I'd like to talk to Mandy about it to see if anything was missed or whatever. So there's one thing. The Secretary of State appears to have added ballots to your total. And then we have between 15 and 20 adjudication errors, where the machines misadjudicated a ballot, where the intent of the voter is clear, but they gave it some other result. And we did 7 counties, and we're doing all of this on volunteer time. So that's the reason it's taken a while. But I will type it all up and get it to you so that you have it in front of you.
And I only want to know about Roosevelt County.
Okay. That is Roosevelt County. And I showed you your cast vote record.
I know, but you said 7 or 8.
No, I know. I'm just telling you that's why it's taking us a while to get through all of it. But I'll get you a report with the specific details so you can see them for yourself.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I have a question for you. When you talk about the misadjudicated
Mm-hmm.
votes, could that not be because we all know that when you have the pen in your hand and you go to vote, you fill in your dot, if you lay that pen down, it can read that other dot. Could it be that somebody rested their pen somewhere and it raised that?
Oh.
You know how when you change, I'm not saying they're
Yes.
all that. I'm asking, is that a possibility of a misjudicated?
It's a variety of things. So what we're able to do is we can match up the individual ballots with the lines in the cast vote record, because we have that official record of how it counted the pattern on each individual ballot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we can say, we'll put it in our software and we come up with individual patterns for all the ballots, and then we can match them up. And so we actually pull out the images of the ballots that are misadjudicated, and I can show you exactly what it was that the machine did. Sometimes it counts like a fold as a vote. You folded your absentee ballot, it went through an oval, it made when it was scanned by the OCR technology, it actually looks like a bunch of black. So it looks like they filled in an oval when they didn't. It was just a fold. So sometimes things will get counted as overvotes that way. I mean, we can see exactly what's happening. It's not really, I think you're speaking to bleed through.
No, not bleed through, but like when you touch it with your pen and you go,
yes.
oh wait, that's not
yes.
the one I wanted
No,
to
there
do.
is some of that.
And a lot of the things that you have said, even with what you use,
Mm-hmm.
is all these different softwares. And you're talking about how the software is manipulated and can be manipulated. But then you turn around and tell me that you came to your conclusion with your software.
That's why we would give you the actual images and say, here is what we're seeing. Here is the image number. Here it is in the cast vote record. You can make up your own mind. But there is so I know what you're talking about. Like you're making there's like a small dot in one oval,
Right.
but they truly filled in the other. Well, the Dominion software, when they sell you the Dominion system in the user's manual, it tells you if the tabulator detects an overvote, that would be an overvote. Detects an overvote, it will give you an alert and reverse the ballot if a person is there in person and they have an opportunity to say, I think it's reading this as an overvote. I don't think that's what you intended. Would you like to spoil your ballot and fill out a new one? So that is supposed to be the remedy for that. If the machine is supposed to alert you, hey, this ballot has an overvote on it. If it happens in an absentee ballot, you don't have that. The person's not there. And so it can be interpreted. It can be put in a hand count pile and interpreted. Some of the counties have what's called adjudication stations where they have that image would actually pop up on a screen and an election worker would be sitting there and say, oh, I can see what they mean. A lot of times people will, in an absentee ballot, they'll overvote it on accident, or they'll vote for somebody on accident. They'll say, that's not what I intended. They'll put an X, they'll put their initials, they'll put an arrow, I want this one. And they'll say, it's very clear. So in that case, there is no reason that it's not interpreted correctly. But actually, one of the serious errors we find is that feature is not working.
Well,
because
I don't think the machine could pick up their little arrow. And
no, it does.
whatever.
Well,
It's
it would
gonna
pick
be
up an
to the hand
overvote.
count.
Anytime there's an overvote, it's supposed to give you an error. And if it's an absentee, that means the election worker can take it out and say, oh, I can see what the intent was. We're going to put this in the hand recount pile, right? And it'll get counted correctly. But that feature doesn't appear to be working, even though it's advertised and sold to us that way.
I have a question for you. Have you taken any of this evidence to our state senators and representatives?
Yes.
And what actions are they taking at the lawmaking house there in Santa Fe to stop this?
Nothing. I've taken it to a handful of legislatures and they say, we see what you're saying, but we are so outnumbered that we are not heard. That's why I think the only hope for people to get their confidence back in their elections is to take it to the people who have responsibility to get this election, properly done. And in the fact, the legislature has done its job. It has laws on the books that say these things have to be certified. This is the procedure. These are the people that have to, be involved in each step and approve each step. All I'm asking is for the law to be applied as it's written. The legislature has written the law. It's not being followed. That's why the buck really stops at the county level. I mean, I think the legislature absolutely needs to pass voter ID. That's no question. And I think the vast majority of New Mexicans agree with that. But as you know, we are, severely hampered by what I would say is probably decades of election fraud. And so we have one voice in Santa Fe and there's no conservative input. But really, it's not their job at this point because they've written the law. The law must be enforced. The other thing, I have taken some of this stuff to the Attorney General and he ignores it, doesn't even call me back. So I don't see, the hope is not at the state level to return confidence to the voter. The hope is at the county level.
What counties have you presented this to?
Several: Otero, Torrance, here. I've been to Lincoln. I've spoken to multiple sheriffs, Sierra County.
Have you been down to the west side of the state much?
West. Not much.
I
I mean,
mean-
I've done presentations to people there. So I've been in Sandoval. I've been in, David was in, I think it's San Miguel. But yeah. Yes, sir.
So what all did you get changed to the Otero County?
Well, they voted to sue the Secretary of State based on the certification and the error issue. And the attorney is failing to move on what the commission instructed him to do. So the people just this week, I mean, they're going to show up in mass to their county commission meeting and demand of the attorney, why haven't you acted on this? We're coming right up to the election, and he's had 2 months to write up a writ of mandamus or whatever he chooses to do with the causes of action and pursue it. But he is failing his constituents. That's what's happening right now. They did pass a resolution, which is their opinion, that they want to get rid of the machines. They want to hand count their ballots. They want to get rid of the drop boxes. That's another thing I didn't really touch on. But the drop boxes themselves are not statutory right now. They're simply a rule in the Secretary of State's, rule book. And she has allowed other counties not to use their drop boxes. Lee County put out 0 with no issue. Lincoln County put out 1 with no issue, one that was right outside the county clerk's office. So it is not a statute. That's something that you should be easily able to take care of and get rid of them by an ordinance that you're not going to allow drop boxes or whatever you choose to do. That's another cause of action, another action that you all can take.
Any more comments or questions?
Thank you.
Thank you all.
for your
Thank
time.
you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Sorry, I tried to jump past you. I didn't realize that was. All right, now on to informational items. Has Miss Green made it here yet? All right, well, we'll go on to the Eastern New Mexico update on the Geo Bond presentation. This is Dr. Caldwell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the commission. I realize these are very important issues that you're dealing with today, and I'm hoping that this is not a controversial one for you. So as all of you know, the general obligation bond occurs in New Mexico every 2 years, and it basically will infuse into our economy $215 million to help support public education in the maintenance and occasionally the construction of buildings that support higher education. This is a huge advantage to counties like ours. We'll be receiving the 3rd largest dollar amount if we do pass the GEO bond. That will help lodgers tax, it will help gross receipts, it will help put people in restaurants, people in hotels, and it will help the students of Eastern New Mexico University and from across the state have high quality educational opportunities when they come to our campus. I'll mention briefly the GEO bond project that was successful in the last election, and that's Roosevelt Science Center. As you know, science facilities have very high dollar costs to maintain equipment. That project is ongoing. It will be completed within a year, well, January from now, and it will have state-of-the-art equipment for science students and also research labs. The new project that is on the current GEO bond, and we compete very aggressively to get these projects approved, to get the dollar amounts approved. So we do not take this request to you lightly, and the state does not take the projects that are approved cavalierly. So the project that we are asking for is to redo the building where most of our most important student services occur. And that would include enrollment services, admissions, advising, counseling, career services, accessibility services, the Office of the Vice President for Student Affairs, which does all adjudication of any student issue. So this is an important building for us, a very important building to our students, and that is why we are asking for that building to be a new construction. We'll be taking down a very old building, Harding Hall, and building the SAS, or Student Academic Services building, in that location. So there will be no increase in square footage. There will be an increase in the efficiency of the building with renovated HVAC, natural lighting, and also better internet and connectivity in this building. And it will be done for $9 million, which I think you'll agree for a 3-story building that serves 5,000 students, both online and in person, is a bargain. $3 million additional dollars will be added by the university out of its own resources to fulfill this particular structure should the bond be successful. That's not the only advantage to Eastern New Mexico University and to the citizens of New Mexico. There are several projects on the GEO bond that will help every child in New Mexico, and I'm referring to the psychiatric wing that will be added at UNM. It will serve every child in New Mexico with any sort of psychiatric problem. This has been sorely needed in the state, as was pointed out during the pandemic, and that's an opportunity that comes to Roosevelt County just as well as Bernalillo. There are also ag enhancements to the agriculture program down in New Mexico State, and we all know how important those extension offices are to our county and to our community. So the GEO bond serves both Eastern New Mexico University citizens of Roosevelt County and the entire state, as does the GEO bond. So I ask you, since I cannot ask you to vote for a particular issue, to certainly vote on GEO bond question 3. This is no longer, the letters have been removed, so it's no longer ABC. It's 1, 2, 3, but you're smart and can figure that out. So I do ask that you turn over the ballot and consider the students across New Mexico when you vote on GEO bond question 3 for higher education. If I may be permitted, Mr. Chairman, I'll just give you a few updates about the university, if I may.
Go ahead.
We'll keep it brief and I hope happy. First of all, we would like to thank, although Kay Green is not here, we'd like to thank Roosevelt General Hospital for opening their emergency room to our rodeo contestants at our very large rodeo 2 weeks ago. We had 611 participants, the largest in Eastern's history, 3 days, full arenas, and wonderful competition. No serious injuries, thanks to Roosevelt General Hospital, and we're very happy to have them there as a partner. I will also mention Family Weekend this week. We are just extremely happy that, again, we correspond with the Peanut Valley Festival. So when we invite families back to Eastern, we also say, and go down the road and visit the Peanut Valley Festival. We are also doing a mini ag expo during our tailgate from 3 until 6 before the football game. We're having a milking exhibition. We're having goats. We're having yes, I know. We're very excited about the goats. I'm just saying. We're having all kinds of ways to promote and discuss and educate about agriculture in Roosevelt County. We're inviting our 4-H students to come for free to the football game and, of course, to the tailgate before. So just 2 ways that I would like you to see us as your partner in enhancing the economic development of this area and this county. And with the GEO bond, we can do even more. Finally, we had celebrated homecoming, and we are constantly gratified at the number of alums who come back, who tell us their story, and in whom we are so proud and so grateful for the work that they do across this state to make it a better place for all of us. So with that, I will stop and respond to any questions you may have, or allow you to move on with your important agenda.
Mr. Dixon, you have anything?
I
Savage?
would like to make a comment. I don't have a question really, but could you possibly include the FFA members into that getting free admission to the bowl games?
I believe I could do that, Commissioner. I believe I know each of your names and could manage that.
Okay. So now, there's something else I'd like to comment on. We have talked some about supporting the agriculture community, and I'm particularly concerned about the agriculture program at Eastern. I'm concerned about, I think we have a very good professor in there, and she's a local light. We all have so much respect for her, and I think she's doing a very good job. And I would like to continue for the administration to do everything they can in support of her. And I really would like to thank you because we had a problem with the New Mexico State University, or Dr. Gary Aycock, who is the state supervisor for agriculture education, and the people in the administration at that level were wanting to move, or talking about moving, the state parliamentary procedure contest from Eastern. And of course, I wanted to keep it there because we'd like for students to come to Eastern so we can showcase our university, because I think we have some very good programs there that students would be interested in coming. But we would like to get people to come here. And so, of course, you were very helpful there in writing the letter to Dr. Aycock, reinforcing my request. Hey, we'd like to keep that here so we can have students from all over the state come to Eastern for FFA activities, because that will help Dr. Baldock with her program. And probably it's hard for her to compete against so many other universities like WT, Texas Tech, even Hobbs Junior College, other New Mexico State. But just personally speaking, I'd like to keep the agriculture active in here, because we have so many students who maybe can't afford to go off to New Mexico State. They can't afford to go to WT. But if we can keep a good program here where they can get the same piece of paper, maybe to teach ag here, I think it would be our benefit. It'll help the college and it'll help our community. So I want to thank you for writing that letter to Dr. Aycock.
Well, it was my pleasure, Commissioner Savage. And I would like to say that Dr. Baldock is absolutely great. She's a local girl. She's got a great degree. She's done judging for years and years, very connected to the community. And we will definitely support agriculture and bringing that event to our campus any way that we can. And thank you for your help in making that possible too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. You have anything? Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. All right. We're going to take, we're taking a 10-minute break. We'll be back. No, I didn't see it, but I sent one of my day. Wait, I got to make this.